Monkeyboy's YouTube channel is a channel than which none greater could be conceived, and so you should subscribe and watch all of his content post-haste.
Hi, which did you want to talk about?
Hi, so I see the host here saying that the Trinity is impossible, and I would like to talk about that.
Okay.
So, can you give the argument?
You can speak to him in Spanish because Monkeyboy is from Puerto Rico. So
No, I don't know Spanish though, unfortunately. But yeah,
Yeah, okay, so
yeah, it's a commitment of the Trinity. There's one God, and there's three distinct persons who share the same essence, such that of each person they are God. And I take it if you count numerically by the number of things that have that property, you count that number of things, just like if there were three distinct persons who are each king, you count three kings. I think you would count three gods, such that it's impossible that the Trinity is true.
okay. So about that, why should we think that we should count by the number of persons and not by the fact that there is only one divine being?
But there are three distinct persons.
Well, yes, but we don't. Since these three persons are identified with this one being, which will be the one God, it is just one God because there is only one being.
What do you mean by one being?
One being. Okay. There is this thing called the divine essence, which is the one God, and the divine essence in it contains these three suppositums, hypostases, or simply called persons, which are the three divine persons. But the one God is simply a Trinity. That's the one God. So
Yeah, but if there's three distinct persons that are each God, then how's there not three gods?
How is that not three gods? Well, the reason for why, for example, three humans are, well, if you have three persons who have a human essence, they are three humans. It's because they have specific, numerically distinct human essences, even though it's one specific human essence that they share. But in the case of the Trinity, there is only one numerically identical divine essence. That's why it's only one God.
Yeah, but sharing the same essence, you would count three of those things.
But we'll count what?
Yeah, you would count three of those things.
We count three persons, but there is
if there's $3 and they each have the same monetary value, they're each like $1 in value. They're three, pieces of paper or dollar bills, and they're each one value. They share maybe one essence, right, in terms of monetary value, but they're still just doing three distinct dollar bills, such that you would count $3, three $1 bills.
In that case, what they will be sharing will not be a numerically identical divine essence, but it will only be a specific essence.
But I don't get this.
I think you guys are talking like questions. I think it's better to run it on transitivity than like the predication, but you can run it on predication as well. But you just got to be clear. The point is, God, that there are three like hypostases. That there are three persons, and each person is a G, right? And the point is, if the persons are discernibles and each person is a G, you'd count three Gs, not one G. If the Son is God, right, which is equivalent to saying the Son has a divine essence or whatever. If the Son is God, and the Father is God, and the Holy Spirit is God, and the Son is non-identical to the Father, that means the Son is discernible from the Father. That entails that there are two gods.
That entails that there are three gods? Because why?
Because they're discernible.
Because they are discernible? Why would discernibility?
Because the Father is not identical to the Son.
Yeah, the Father is not identical to the Son, but he's identical to the divine essence.
Yeah, but that's going to be a problem as well, because identity is transitive.
No, only identity in the absolute sense is transitive. Not all type of identity is transitive.
Well, we got to get clear on types of identity here, because we're just talking about identity as used in logic, which is going to be numerical identity. I understand that maybe like scholastics like to use different languages of identity.
Well,
but if you actually analyze the kind of identities that the scholastics talk about, it just ends up that they're either talking about identity and they're just confused about the transitivity aspect of what they're talking about, as in the case of Thomas Aquinas, or they're not actually affirming identity. We can just ask the question again if the Father is identical to God or not. So let's just be clear on the notions of identities you have in mind. What are they called, and what are their properties?
Well, I'm as good for you because I'm a scholastic. Well, I figured that.
Yeah, I figured that.
So with identity, all identity means identity means is simply sameness. There is some sort of sameness between two things. For example, I will say
identity and same, they just mean the same thing. That's not what I'm specifically interested in is like which scholastic notion of identity do you have in mind?
Just the traditional view that is explained in the scholastic dictionary, which says that identity is simply some sort of sameness between two things. Like, for example, you and me are identical. Why? Because we are the same species. We are humans. Me and a cat are identical. Why? Because we are of the same genus. We are both animals. That's what identity means.
No, but same and identical are just synonymous terms. But the scholastic had like specific notions of identities. And I'm just curious, which one do you have in mind, if you have any?
In the Trinity, there is a real identity with virtual distinction.
Look, the point is, I'm saying actually I'm saying identity is transitive. But if you want to say, well, there is a interesting notion, and I'm saying also sameness is transitive. But I'm saying if you have some other notion of identity in mind, I'd like to analyze it. And I'm familiar with like scholastics have different notions. But I'm just saying those notions as well, that some scholastic claimed are not transitive, like Aquinas, are in fact transitive.
Why would it be transitive?
I'll just give you an example, right? Like Thomas Aquinas talked about sameness of thing and sameness of concept, right? Sameness of thing would just be almost saying like the two terms refer to the same thing, whereas sameness of thing and concept would saying that the concept is same. This is roughly what in analytic philosophers people today classify as analytical identity and synthetic identity, right? And the mistake that Aquinas did was he thought that there's only going to be transitivity if it is an analytic identity, if it's the sameness in thing and sameness in concept. Whereas actually even what people call synthetic identity is transitive. And I can give you an example. Think of like Superman and Clark Kent, right? Superman and Clark Kent are going to be sameness in thing, but they're not going to be sameness in concept. The concept of Superman is not the same as the concept of Clark Kent. But they're still going to be transitive, because if I said, right, it escaped my mind the company that Clark Kent writes for. Maybe monkeyboy or something. Either way, it doesn't happen. Let's just say
The Daily Planet.
The Daily Planet.
Yeah. Let's just say if I said Clark Kent is the best writer of the Daily Planet, it's going to follow that Superman is the best writer of the Daily Planet, right? But there you have a concept that is not sameness in concept; it's just sameness in thing. So the point is, sameness in thing suffices for transitivity.
Okay.
There's two other relations that are transitive, right? That Aquinas employed: sameness in thing and sameness in concept. So under all of those notions, there's going to be a transitivity inference, and you're going to get the contradiction of the Son is the Father and the Son is not the Father. So when you say when you say Father is Son, or the Father is the same as the Son, you're gonna explain to me what you personally mean by same, and where you got this notion of sameness.
Well, actually, to respond to your objection of Superman and Clark Kent, it's actually very easy, because Superman and Clark Kent are only nominally distinct. But the virtual distinction is a stronger distinction than like Superman and Clark Kent. You do know that the scholastic make multiple types of conceptual distinction, right? There is the virtual distinction, and then there is a nominal distinction.
Right, but I'm kind of confused. Which distinction here do you think is relevant for transitivity?
For transitivity, well,
Yeah.
technically, for two things to collapse into each other, it will have to be both real and virtual, and only a nominal distinction. Then transitivity will apply.
So because I was making an even weaker claim. What I'm saying is sameness in thing suffices for transitivity. You don't even need sameness in more than merely sameness of thing. But now you brought in a distinction between virtual and nominal, I guess?
Yes.
Yeah, so what's the distinction between the virtual and the nominal?
Okay, let me explain to you. I actually brought here the thing here.
Right.
The virtual distinction, it is a distinction between two concepts which don't mutually implicate each other, so that one can occur without the other. But this is the major virtual distinction. And then the minor virtual distinction is a distinction between two concepts which necessarily implicate each other. Now, in this case, okay, actually, let me give you an analogy. Imagine, let's say, a king. The king has the judicial power, the legislative power, and the executive power. Now, the king does not have a multiplicity of powers. He only has this one kingly power, but this kingly power does truly and properly has these three distinct attributes contained virtually in it. Do you understand?
I'm not really sure how this goes to the Trinity thing. By the way, monkeyboy or Jack, if you want to jump in, just feel free. I didn't mean to hijack the conversation. But
Be defending a relative identity view, because maybe we could talk about that.
Yeah,
Relative identity, you say?
No, we can get into relative identity. I just want to be clear on like what notion of sameness he has in mind. If it's going to be something like relative identity.
Well, okay. So when we say that the one God is the Trinity, all what we are saying is that there is this one reality, one thing, if you want to, one absolute thing, which is simply the divinity, and the divinity contains three relative realities, which are the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, which are distinct by way of relative opposition.
They're sorry, what was the last thing you said?
They are distinct by way of relative opposition. So the Father is not the Son because the Father generates the Son, and the Father and the Son are not the Holy Spirit because they inspired the Holy Spirit.
Right, but that just sounds like you're saying to me the Father is not the Son because the Father has predicates which the Son doesn't have.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah,
of course.
I understand, but like the point with like the logical problem of the Trinity that we're running is that we're already committed to that, because you're already committed that the Father is not the Son, and the Son is not the Holy Spirit, and the Holy Spirit is not the Father. The point is we just get a contradiction because of the transitivity that follows from when you're saying the Father is God. And what I'm concerned with is it going to be an identity? Is it an is of identity? And if it is an is of identity, how can it escape transitivity? And it seems like the only way to do that is if actually you're talking about something akin to what people call relative identity. But I understand a lot of people who come from like a scholastic tradition like to use these other notions of identity that are found with like Scotus and Aquinas. But I'm just saying, like, once you analyze those, it just seems like they're either not identities at all, or they are actually transitive, and it's just like the scholastics were confused about.
Okay, so when you say identity, let's get this straight. When you say identity, what does that mean? When you say it.
When I say identity, I just mean what people in everyday language mean when they say, that is my father, 2 + 2 is 4, yeah, that is me, I'm the one who took the milk from the fridge, right? And I think that notion of identity there is numerical identity, and that is the notion of identity that I use when I'm asking you, is the Father God, or is the Father identical to God, or is the Father the same being or entity or thing as God?
Well, what I will say is that the Father is the same being that as God. Well, or better say, God is the same being as the Father. They are simply one and the same being.
Yeah, but that when you're saying that just translates to me as you saying the Father is God, or the Father is the same thing as God, which is fine. But then if you're also saying the Son is the same thing as that, it just seems to me to follow by law of transitivity that the Father is the Son.
Well, this type of transitivity only applies when there is an adequate identity. Not when there is an inadequate identity. And I'm going to define inadequate identity.
Yeah, that would be nice.
Gonnet defines the latter in inadequate as follows. A thing is said to be inadequately identified with something when it is not the same as everything with which that thing is identified, nor is that something with which it is identified merely the same as that thing. Now, let me unpack that. Here, identity is understood in relation to the relative extension of the subject and the predicate. If the predicate is really communicated to the subject, this communication may either exclude full the predication or allow for it. For example, when we say all men are rational animals, the extension of both terms is the same, and the communication is exclusive. There is no broader class of rational animals beyond men in this context. However, not all identity functions this way. When we say John is a man, the predicate man is truly communicated to John, but not exclusively. It does not follow that all men are John. The communication is real but not limiting. Thus, in such cases, reversing the subject and predicate is logically invalid. And as Saint Robert Bellarmine explains, I say that principle is not true universally when the two things are equal to a third thing adequately, as in mathematics. So your example of 2 = 2, this will be adequate identity. So, but if you say man and horse are really the same thing with an animal, therefore they are the same between themselves, that is not valid, because man and animal are not the same really adequately. Thus, also the essence and paternity, that is the Father, are not the same adequately, because the essence extends itself to more things. Nor is it true that principle is the foundation. The principle of transitivity is the foundation of the whole human discourse, if no limitations are added. Otherwise, there will be so many figures in vain, and the mode of syllogism, whereby it is explained how two extremes are to be joined with the middle term. Okay, there it goes some to be more explanations, but the first thing that I said will be the more relevant part. I can read another thing here if you want. That by
I think we need more clarity, because so we have these two. We have to do this distinction: adequate identity, which is the one used in mathematics.
Yes,
so that's what I call numerical identity. So that we're going to equate that with adequate identity. And then you're saying there's this other notion called inadequate identity. And that's the one you want to be using for when you're saying the Father is God.
Yeah,
I'm just-
exactly.
I'm just curious, can you give me examples of inadequate identities? What is something, besides the Trinity and God, just other examples of it, just so I can get an idea of this.
Well, something analogical?
No,
Like
just,
very easy. I actually gave one in case you did not hear about, like, me and a horse are the same thing as an animal, but I am not a horse.
well, that's not, yeah, but that just sounds to me as confused because I don't think you're the same thing as an animal. What I think is with that is what we call predication. I would say you are an animal. You know, if I say you are a man, I'm predicating something. That's not an identity statement.
Well, we will say that in the case of the divine essence.
If I say, let me just give you an example. If I say goat edits is an animal, I'm not using the is of identity. I'm using the is of predication. I'm actually predicating something of it.
Okay, so just to be clear, when you say identity, what you say that identity only applies is if it is as strong or analogically as strong as 2 equals 2? That's what identity is?
No, I'm not making a claim like that. I'm leaving that open. I'm just interested in this other identity claim that is not going to be transitive that you use when you say when you say the Father is God.
Well, the thing is that when the scholastics talk about identity, we don't mean it in the modern term, or in the modern sense of like the exact same thing, such that every predicate of both such that every predicate predicated to one is predicated of the other, like Superman and Clark Kent. Superman and Clark Kent are identical in such a way that everything true of one is true of the other. Do you know what you mean by?
I don't think that's like a meaning thing. I think actually that follows typically from like what's known as Leibniz's law.
The funny thing is that Leibniz himself said that this does not apply to the Trinity.
Yeah, but we don't. Yeah, but that's irrelevant. We don't care what Leibniz says. I'm just saying it's not a matter of meaning. It's not like what you mean. That's rather something that is true of identity that follows from Leibniz' life. Leibniz's life.
What's up, Danny? Danny is in the.
Yeah,
What?
Bring up Danny.
I did not understand.
I'm saying Leibniz's law is a thesis about identity.
Yeah, I've talked to him before, but
It's not in the meaning.
We are so back. Look who is here. Danny, how are you?
Yeah, that's my friend Danny.
Yeah, we interacted with each other before.
Okay. No, but I just wanted to. This is just important before you talk to Danny because I think in the examples you gave from the guy, he just confuses is a predication with some other notion of identity. What he was just talking about is predication. Like you are like goat is an animal. Is an animal there? Is not an identity. That's just predication.
Yeah. Well, that actually was what I was trying to get at, and that is like me as a scholastic. When I say identity, that for me just means some sort of sameness. So, for example, between you and me, there is a sameness in which we are both humans. That will be for me identity, and for all the scholastics, that's what identity means.
I think what you mean there is like we have similarities, or like things that are true of you are also true of me, but those are not identities. What I'm concerned with is identity, and I don't agree with this thing that's not what scholastics said, because I think the scholastic do affirm numerical identity of God and the Father, and they do have a problem with transitivity. And I gave a point for the problem, and there's like a lot of literature on this on Aquinas.
Well, actually, I just read to you a quote by a scholastic explicitly saying that the identity between God and the Father is inadequate, not adequate.
Yeah, well, I don't think that's an identity because I can ask you, define this relation for me, and the only thing you gave me is an example of predication.
Well, that's the thing. The scholastics define identity in a way, way, way different way as us. But actually, I can search to you the scholastic dictionary and show you what it says there.
I'm denying that. I'm saying we have Thomas Aquinas, for example. He did define identity, and he just was mistaken when he thought transitivity only applies for sameness in thing and concept. It suffices for sameness in thing. And there's actually, even in Aquinas, where in other times when he's talking about sameness in thing, he thinks it is transitive. And so he's either like mistaken or contradictory or maybe some kind of a mistake with the author.
Well, this is actually very easy.
And there's a lot of literature on this, by the way.
Well, I know that there is a lot of literature on this. But this is actually very easy because when he says that, for example, in that, I know the quote you reference when he says that two things are only identical with each other if they're identical both in reality, it's in reality and in concept. That's what he said. And reality and in concept.
No, not just, well, they're going to be transitive if they're, yeah. I mean, I can get the passage specifically if you want. I'm just going off my head, but.
Yeah, I know that. I actually know that one. I just cannot. I personally don't know exactly what it is, but I actually read it because I was actually also on this issue of the Trinity. Me personally, I'm still learning about the Trinity. So one day I could come back here and have more.
I think these two paragraphs are very useful. I'm just going to read them quickly, and then you can say what you want. But this is from the SAP, right? It says, "But how may these relations be constituted or somehow give rise to the three divine hypostases when each just is the divine essence? For if each is the divine essence, won't it follow that each is just identical, both of the others as well? Aquinas holds that it does not follow. That would amount to modalism, not orthodox Trinitarianism. To show why it does not follow, he distinguishes between identitas secundum rem e rationem, sameness of thing and concept, and mere identitas secundum rem, sameness of thing. To the preceding objection, then, Aquinas says that the alleged consequence would follow only if the persons were the same both in thing and in concept, but they are not. They are merely the same thing." And it goes, "This move is puzzling. Aquinas holds that there are three, are not merely similar or derived from the same source, but are in some strong sense the same, but not identical, which he appears to understand as sameness in both thing and concept. Even this last is surprising. One would think that for Aquinas, sameness in thing just is identity, and sameness in concept would mean that we apply the same concept to some apparent thing. Christopher Hodges holds that Aquinas is simply confused, his desire for orthodoxy having led him into this and other necessary falsehood. On Hodges' reading, Aquinas does think of sameness as identity, but he incoherently holds it to be non-transitive. If A and B are identical and B and C are identical, it does not follow that A and are identical. While in some contexts, he correctly assumes that it is transitive. So that's like the point that I was making, that actually, yes, Aquinas did have these two notions of identities, but they're actually both transitive once you do a proper analysis of them.
Yeah, okay. By the way, what exactly were you reading? I did not catch the citation.
Oh, this is from the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy.
Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy, okay.
Yeah.
Well,
it's from the entry called, it's actually from a supplement to the main entry in the Trinity. It's like a supplement. It's called History of Trinitarian Doctrines, and there's like a section there on Aquinas.
Okay, I will search it. But if you want like a treatise on Aquinas and the Trinity, there is one that I'm planning to actually read eventually once I finish my other Trinitarian books, because I have actually a 7 books list on the Trinity, and I am only 2 books in. So that's why I am having trouble to explain all of this stuff. I am just starting my journey into the Trinity. But if you want, you can read. It's called Thomas Aquinas and the Trinity by Father Julius Emery, published by Oxford University Press.
Yeah, I mean, there's like a lot of things to read on this. There's probably like hundreds of books written on Aquinas and Trinity. My point is just that, like notions like numerical identity and relative, what some people like to call now relative identity, and like the proper philosophical analysis of these are like a very recent thing. Whereas like scholasticism goes back to, hundreds of years. It's like, from the start of the 7th century up until like the 16th century, you have like what is known as like the scholastic period. So they didn't work with these like modern notions that we're working with, where we like analyzed identity. But I'm saying you're not going to get something much interesting from looking to them, because the question that we have is, we use identity in everyday language all the time. We use it in mathematics, right? We use it in comics. We say Superman is Clark Kent. What I'm just interested in, what I'm asking, is the Father identical to God? Is the answer to that question yes or no? And maybe what you want to say is, no, they're not identical, but there's this other notion of identity that I want to apply to them. And if that's the case, then I want like an analysis of that identity. And the only one that I've seen close to that is people who try to apply relative identity. I think there's some room to be made there. I haven't seen much with like any other notion. Sorry, go ahead, Jack.
Okay, so just to bottom line.
I think Jack wanted to say something, but go ahead. You can
we will simply completely concede that using modern definitions of identity, which will be like 2 and 2 or Clark Kent and Superman, if that's what we mean by identity, we will simply completely concede that the Father and God and the Son and God and the Spirit and God are not identical in that sense. That will be the bottom line.
It just sounds like he's using identity to mean predication.
Yeah, hold on. Just wait a second here. I actually am trying to find the exact citation. I am just here in the dictionary.
I think the Italian guy, when he was talking about the other, like the inadequate one, just means predication. Yeah, is that what you mean, Jack?
Well, let me.
I'm not talking about Aquinas. I'm talking about this guy.
Oh, this guy.
Yeah.
Oh, me?
Yeah.
Well, what did you ask? I did not catch it.
I said it sounds like what you mean by identity is not even relative identity, but just predication.
Yeah. Well, sort of, because we will say that, for example, under scholastic definitions, you and me are identical. Why? because we are both humans. So if you think that that's predication, then yeah, it's
But that's
predication.
not identity, though. That's just predication.
Yeah, I know that in the modern sense of identity, it's not identity, but in the scholastic sense of identity, it's just that's identity.
I don't think. I mean, I don't know. Maybe some idiosyncratic scholastic person use it like that, but I'm not aware of like scholastics who use identity like that. Maybe Jack.
Mira, look, here it is. Here it is.
No, let me
Of the
see.
Scholastic Dictionary. Do you see what I am pointing?
How do I make your screen big? Because for me, it's like a little square.
Here, let me make it big.
Thanks. There it is. Sameness in some respect. And here, specific identity, it is sameness in specific nature or essence among individuals of a species, and this counts as a type of identity. So that's just
Can you go back to the first one you were looking at?
Yeah, here. Let me catch it. Sorry. Okay. There it is. Identity. Sameness in some respect. Now there are many types of identity here. And one of them, as it says, is specific identity, which is simply sameness in specific nature, like between you and me, which are identical because we're both humans. Hello?
Sameness. Yeah, I'm just looking at this. But that's not the definition of identity there. That's like formal identity. Okay, specific formal identity. Sameness in specific nature or essence among individuals of a species. Sameness of its essence nature while the individual undergoes other changes in individual characteristics.
Yes. For example, okay, did you ask a question or?
Now I was just saying, go back to the other one. Let me just see that screen.
Yeah, identity there. Sameness in some respect. I can also pull out some other stuff that I have here.
What was the example that God before and after? Okay. Yeah. Intentional identity, sameness or correspondence of the form in the concept with the form in the known. Logical identity, sameness or equal. What was that? What is the identical in terms of logical relations? Okay.
Okay, do you want me to pull out what distinctions are? I actually have the one on distinctions. And saying distinction is simply lack of identity. Understanding distinctions helps understand identity. Okay? Is that fine with you?
Yeah, no. I mean, I appreciate that you took out the dictionary and showed me.
Well, yeah, I whenever I come to these lives, I always try to come prepared for a discussion. You guys got me a bit unprepared because it's already 10 p.m. here, and I was not expecting to enter into a discussion. If I had been more prepared, this would have been like much more better. So
no, but I don't think there's much relevance to these like notions because I'm just like the question that I'm asking you is just is the Father identical to God? And if by identity you mean something specific, just define that relation for me.
Well, it will be.
But I do appreciate that you're like trying. That you took out the dictionary and say like, well, I'm trying. There's like all these notions there, but I'm now curious just like how you're using the notion.
Okay, so we will say that there is an inadequate identity between the Father and God.
But that just
seems like predication.
Should I bring G1 up? Because I know Danny knows who.
No, I know Joe G1 is. He's cool.
So that seems like predication. Okay. Hold on, wait a second.
Yeah, the inadequate one is just predication. That's just me, for example, saying you are a human. That's not like an identity. That's like what we call predication. I'm just predication. The predicate.
In other words, are you saying that Jesus and the Father are God, and the sense of "are" there is the same sense of is when we say you and I are human?
It is similar, but not absolutely the same. This is something that I need to prepare more.
What distinguishes the relation?
What distinguishes the relation? Well, the main difference between like you and me versus the Father and the Son is that in our case, our nature does not have formal existence. Like there is not this thing here, called humanity, which is somehow in us. Like that's just another thing. But in the case of God, there is truly and properly a thing called the divinity, which is communicated to the Father, the Son, and the Spirit.
But I think
what? No, go ahead, V.
I just think we're just like kicking the can further down the road with the problem here because just think of the question that I asked you, like, is the Father identical to God? If you want to say no, he's not, because I don't mean numerical identity. I actually mean some other kind of identity. And it sounds like what you want to say now is the identity of something like when you say you're the same human, like I am identical to you. That's the kind of identity that you have in mind, that I'm identical to you because I'm a human. Or my essence is humanity, and your essence is a humanity. We're kind of kicking down the can further down the road because me and Danny are going to be the same in this respect. But given that me and Danny are discernibles, we're still going to say there are two human beings. But presumably you want to block the move to saying that there are three gods.
Yeah, exactly. That's how we will have. That actually was what I was trying to explain just a second ago, which was that in our case, since this is actually very difficult to explain. So sorry if I stop to think for a second. Okay, so in the case of the Trinity, there is actually properly this thing called the divinity, which is communicated to the three persons. Unlike in our case, which there is not actually, we would agree that there is not a thing out there called humanity, which we have. It's only a concept that we make based on similarity.
Is there a human substance?
What?
Is there a human substance?
A human substance? I think an actual thing? No.
Okay, is there a divine substance?
Yes, that's the difference.
And so you're saying that there are no human substances, but there are divine substances.
Well, if I do you mean essence by substance?
What did you say?
I'm just gonna, because like the thing is, like if he denies that the Father and God are numerically identical, he's just gonna get hit with like that there are three gods now. But it sounds like he wanted to agree that they're not identical. He said, sorry, no, not identical. He agreed that God is not identical to the Father, and God is not identical to the Son, and God is not identical to the Holy Spirit. But given that he predicates God of each of them and they're discernible, we're still gonna get three gods.
Yeah, and whether that ontologically commits you to a human substance or divine substance, it doesn't matter.
Okay. Well, okay. So, we probably had. Hello. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Yeah. Sorry. I was actually trying to speak, but I forgot that I had the microphone attached here, and I left without the microphone, so you could not hear me. So basically, what I was going to say. Can you hear me now?
Yeah,
Can you hear me? Yeah. I am testing how far can the microphone hear me. So right now it's on the table. So okay. Sorry, I'm trying to think. Okay, just before I leave, because I really have to keep investigating the decision to be able to give you guys a satisfactory answer. The point will be that unlike in our case where there is this thing called the universal, which is basically like species, like humanity or catness, that's a universal. In the case of true universals, when they are predicated from two particular things, like you and me, which are both on the universal of humanity, that actually does make two humans, because the universal only has fundamental existence, which is that it is grounded in the particular things that we see, like from seeing particular man, we think, there is this thing called humanity. In the case of God, though, there is actually, properly speaking, a thing called the divinity, which is communicated to the three persons, which will be more or less how we account for there being only one God, because we identify that one divine substance as the one God, and that there is only one substance, there is only one God.
Yeah, but like none of this is real. Like the point with the identity and counting and predication, that's like a formal problem. It's not gonna be parasitic on any kind of like specific metaphysics that you have. Like I'm just concerned with, do you think that God is numerically identical to the Father? And if the answer to that is yes, then you say the same thing of the Son, then by transitivity you're gonna get a contradiction. If you say no, then we're gonna have a problem that now by discernibility we're gonna have three gods. But one of the propositions that we're committed to is that there's only one God. And this is all formal. This is like all formal. This predates any kind of ontologizing or doing any kinds of metaphysics. This is just follows from the rules of logic.
What do you mean by formal? But like, what do you mean by that?
All of this follows just from what the identity symbol means and the rules of reference in logic.
Yeah, we will have to analyze that. But actually, it is actually surprising that we did not come to define this. But before we say, are there three gods? What is a god for you? What is like a god?
Yeah, but the beautiful thing about it being formal, we don't even need to define that. The point is, all I need is like you have the G predicate, and you're saying this G predicate is true of the Father. The Father is a G, right? Or the Son is a G, and the Holy Spirit is a G, and the Father is not identical. That is sufficient to give us three Gs. If the Father and the Son are discernible, that means that they're not identical to each other. But if you want to say if you want to say that the Father is God, that is identity, you get the other problem, which is by transitivity, we now get the Father is identical to the Son. And this just follows from transitivity and discernibility. We don't need to do any metaphysics to get these problems.
I mean, we will still have the smart problem that if I simply say that God is the one divine essence, that it does not really matter the fact that there are three persons.
This is what he's saying, right? Let's just use an example. If I say that if if A then B and if B then C, then you can infer that if A then C, right?
Well, yeah, but that's because that identity is adequate,
Just
not
wait.
inadequate.
The point is that you can infer if A then C, right? Go.
Yeah, but because the identity is adequate.
Now, first of all, those are just conditionals, by the way. But the thing is that does it matter what A, B, and C, what propositions those are? Does it matter what the content of the propositions are?
Well, the content is not what matters. What matters is what you mean. What do you mean by the identity? That's what matters.
Well, the rules there, with the conditionals, right? Propositional logic. If A, then B, then B, then C, then you can infer if A, then C. There, it doesn't matter what those propositions stand for or what the content of those propositions are. It's right. And so if someone said, I deny that if those two premises are true, that I accept that those two premises are true, but I deny the conclusion, there's going to be a formal problem. It just does not matter what the content is. And that's what Venus is trying to tell you, is that there's a formal issue, seemingly, right? That if you have, A, B, and C. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so just for example, it is the case that it doesn't matter what A, B, and C mean in this case. What it matters is what do you mean by this? This is what matters, because that depends. Because if, for example, like the example I said earlier between you and me, which are both identical to being human. So what do you mean by that symbol?
Okay, but then why did you start bringing? I might agree, but why did you start bringing up the substance and stuff again after Venus explained that none of that meant, none of that metaphysics would matter? I just don't know why you brought up the substance.
Well, it will matter, because if what you mean by identity is something different than what I mean, then we will just be talking past each other.
Okay, well, look, yes, okay, by identity here we mean numerical identity.
Okay, like this?
Yeah, like when we say 2 + 2 is 4, when we say water is H2O, when you're saying Clark Kent is Superman.
That's numerical identity for you?
Yeah, that is identity. That is numerical identity.
Well, okay, then this is not the type of identity between father and son.
Right, and so now then Venus gave an argument.
Not father and son. We're talking about father and God.
Yeah.
Father and God. Father and God.
Yeah. Right. So then, if it's not absolute or numerical identity, then it sounds like you're going with predication if you're not going with relative identity.
Well, the problem is, even with predication, you get the other problem that I gave.
The counting problem, right?
Yeah, because the point is, you can either run it by transitivity, or you can run it by discernibility. Like, if the father is a G and the son is a G, and the father is not identical to the son, you have two G's, because the father and the son are discernible.
We have two G's because the father is an animal. Okay, but what would you say is God for you to say that there are three gods?
Sorry? It doesn't matter.
Okay, let me ask you. What would you say is God for you to say that there will be three gods?
That there are going to be three gods?
Yeah, what does the word God mean?
It's like irrelevant what God means.
Yeah, we've been over this. Just like in my example of the hypothetical syllogism, it doesn't matter what A, B, and C stand for.
Yeah, is that, for example, if I say that God is simply the divine essence, and say there is only one divine essence, there is only one God, completely irrespective to the fact that there are three persons, what would you say?
How are you not understanding that it's not content sensitive at this level?
Well, it doesn't matter how you define God. That's the point.
Yeah, but if you say that there will be three gods,
just think whatever you input for God, just think that's going to be captured by the predicate G, right? The point is, when you're saying the Father is a G and the Son is a G and the Father is not the Son, then that's enough to have two G's. That's the point.
Okay, so that's what we say.
Because they're discernible. Now some people they want to say no, the Father is identical to the Son. But
Modalism.
But no. But they want to say we're talking about the relative identity rather than numerical identity. So with respect to G and G alone, they're actually going to be identical. And that's why there's going to be one G. Some people want to try to say that.
That actually is sort of what we will say, but I actually am not prepared to explain it right now. I have to investigate this issue more. But I actually love this discussion, and maybe we can have another discussion another day. monkeyboy, when you have these lives?
Regularly.
Regularly?
like Monday, Wednesdays, maybe sometimes
Okay.
every day throughout the week. So it's
Well, as I said before, I am still in the issue of learning more about the Trinity and be able to explain it to you guys. And usually, when I enter lives, I have a document prepared to explain it. Today, I did not have it, so my skills are not top. One day, I will come back and I will try to have this same discussion. And you, V, and are you a regular who are here to debate these topics? Because I would like to talk with you again.
I would say I'm a regular.
Yeah, perfect. One day, I will come back here and try to have this discussion once again. Whatever time is needed. Well, I will at least try to read all the 7 books that I have before coming back here, but it will take a while because they are a lot. Actually, let me just show you things. So, are we set?
Sorry.
Are we set? Yeah, here it is. I just want to show you guys. This will be the thing that I am planning to read on the Trinity. If you want, guys, you can also read them if you are interested in learning on the Trinity. Do you see it?
I screenshot it. Thank you.
Yeah, just get in mind that these are thousands of pages. Like this one alone is 700 pages.
All right, thanks. Right, you should come back when you have it figured out.
Yeah, but it will take a while because, as you may see, this is a Titanic reading.
All right, good luck.
Good luck and have a nice day.
You too.